Standing on Treaty 6 territory, we recognize and acknowledge that this land on which we stand has been the gathering place for millennia of many Indigenous peoples. As treaty people, we acknowledge, honor, and respect the history, wisdom, knowledge, languages, ceremonies, and culture of the First Nations of this continent, of the Métis peoples, of the Inuit, of all who gathered in this place, Amiskwaci. We learn from the First Peoples of our connection to the land, of our responsibility to protect and respect Mother Earth. We honor and respect and mourn the ancestors and children buried here, the missing and murdered Indigenous women and men. We acknowledge our need for collective healing. We remember that we are all treaty people and that we are all responsible for each other. Welcome. I'm very excited today about getting Carl to speak about his experiences and his reflections on what's happened since. Westwood is a welcoming space where we strive to embrace who and what we are, regardless of belief or how ourselves we currently conceive. Westwood is a challenging place where we individually and collectively trace a path that struggles to find truth. Westwood welcomes our elders, middles, muddles, and youths in a rainbow of peoples and beliefs: theists, non-theists, atheists, paganists, agnostics, gnostics, cynics, and eccentrics. Westwood welcomes people regardless of race, color, class, creed, or breed, gender, ethnicity, unicity, elasticity, and neurodiversity. Westwood welcomes how you conceive your growing identity on the continuum of discovery, whichever pronouns you choose to use today or tomorrow, or the direction of your affections, or your color in the rainbow. Okay. I think we know this one. We're going to start off with this song. Psalm 1. In the Bible, this is where the line comes about the tree planted by the water. There's two paths. Sometimes we complicate things. In Psalm 1, there's two paths. There's the way of the scoffers, the cynics, and so on. People have given up. And just way of righteousness, it's the tree planted by the water. We shall not be moved. We shall not be moved, just like a tree that's planted by the water. We shall not be moved. We're young and old together. We shall not be moved. We're young and old together. We shall not be moved, just like a tree that's planted by the water. We shall not be moved. When we come back to this refrain, let's try some harmony. We shall not be moved. We shall not be moved, just like a tree that's planted by the water. We shall not be moved. We're women and men together. We shall not be moved. We're women and men together. We shall not be moved, just like a tree that's planted by the water. We shall not be moved. We shall not be moved. We shall not be moved, just like a tree that's planted by the water. We shall not be moved. The city and country together, we shall not be moved. The city and country together, we We shall not be moved, just like a tree that's planted by the water. We shall not be moved. We shall not be moved. We shall not be moved, just like a tree that's planted by the water. We shall not be moved. This is the important verse for today. We're black and white together. We shall not be moved. We're black and white together. We shall not be moved, just like a tree that's planted by the water. We shall not be moved. We shall not. We shall not. We shall not be moved. We shall not. We shall not be moved, just like a tree that's planted by the water. We shall not be moved. Wow, that sounds great. Before we do the candles of celebration and concern, I had this poem by Langston Hughes, the great African-American poet. He died in 1967, and I printed it up, and it's on the kitchen table. And I couldn't get the printer working, and I didn't, because it's a longer poem, and it's a wonderful poem. It's called, it's basically, you would think he anticipated Donald Trump, and it's his response to him. But because it's long, I didn't want to read it from the phone, so I found another poem by Langston Hughes called Freedom. Langston Hughes, we have a number of, quite a few recordings of him, because he did recordings for Folkways Records of his poetry. And he had a very kind of matter-of-fact way of reading, so I'll try to capture that the way he reads it. Freedom will not come today, this year, nor ever through compromise and fear. I have as much right as the other fellow has to stand on my own 2 feet and own the land. I tire so of hearing people say, "Let things take their course, tomorrow is another day." I do not need my freedom when I'm dead. I cannot live on tomorrow's bread. Freedom is a strong seed planted in a great need. I live here too. I want my freedom just as you. And I invite anybody who has a candle of celebration or concern to come now. The affirmation. Okay. So, may the light of these candles inspire us to use our power, to heal and not to harm, to help and not to hinder, to serve the spirit of truth in loving affection and trusting hope. You get to sing. Okay, this one is an old gospel. Most of the songs from the civil rights were gospel hymns that just tweak a word here or there. This one, obviously, originally it was about Paul and Silas, and then they kind of represented the people who were being taken to prison for civil rights and so on. And For those of you familiar, sometimes it's keep your eyes on the prize, hold on, and keep your hand on the plow, hold on. So there's both happening. So I might screw up. So kind of don't listen to me with that. And with the hold on, when I sing hold on, you echo, okay? So hold on, hold on, hold on. And then, okay, so Paul and Silas bound in jail, didn't have no one to go their bail. Keep your hand on the plow, hold on, hold on, hold on, hold on. Keep your hand on the plow, hold on, hold on. Mary wore 3 links of chain, every link was freedom's name. Keep your hand on that plow, hold on, hold on, hold on. Keep your hand on that plow, hold on. God gave Noah the rainbow sign, no more water fire next time. Keep your hand on that plow, hold on, hold on, hold on. Keep your hand on that plow, hold on. United Nations make a chain, every link is freedom's name. Keep your hand on that plow, hold on, hold on, hold on. Keep your hand on that plow, hold on. Freedom's name is a mighty sweet, black and white are gonna meet. Keep your hand on that plow, hold on, hold on, hold on. Keep your hand on that plow, hold on. Many good folks have fought and died, so we could be here side by side. Keep your hand on that plow, hold on, hold on, hold on. Keep your hand on that plow, hold on. Freedom's name is mighty sweet, black and white are gonna meet. Keep your hand on that plow, hold on, hold on, hold on. Keep your hand on that plow, hold on. The only thing that we did wrong was stay in the wilderness too long. Keep your hand on that plow, hold on, hold on, hold on. Keep your hand on that plow, hold on, hold on, hold on. Keep your hand on that plow, hold on. Okay, with that, the man of the hour, the one who is at Selma, and Carl Ulrich. So you kind of introduced yourself there when you were talking about your father and your background, but come up and take it away.
Well, in honor of Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday, which is on January 15th, is when it's celebrated, and almost 60 years since the Selma March that resulted in the 1965 Voter Rights Act, the worship committee asked me to speak broadly on civil rights 60 years after Selma. And I think I've spoken 2 or 3 times about my experience at Selma, so I'm not going to really talk about that today, but sort of what's happened since and where we're at. And how do we understand where civil rights legislation is today? Well, I think as we all know, and as a number of our comments this morning and the candles, the news is not good. In 2013, the Supreme Court of the United States actually gutted the Voting Rights Act. This was after 48 years. Yes?
Microphone.
Having trouble hearing me?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Maybe you could raise it or something.
No. I think it's okay now. Maybe they turned it up a little bit. There's anyway, it was after 48 years of being in existence, the Voting Rights Act, and it just had tremendous success in making changes in the states. But in 2013, the Supreme Court decided that it was no longer necessary, there was no more discrimination, and so it wouldn't need to be enforced. Anyway, it was just a huge, tremendous setback, and it removed the most important part of the act. And we like to think that with certain important rights that have been established, that have been won, that the issue is settled, that it can't be taken away. Well, clearly, this is not the case. Democracy requires constant vigilance in both to protect and to strengthen human rights. Civil rights did not come with a guarantee. To understand, I think, what has happened in the U.S., one needs to take and maybe a look back before Selma to understand the whole history in the U.S. since the Civil War. With this, perhaps we can understand more clearly this history and will not be so surprised by what has happened. Because actually, when you look at this history, one could easily say, we've been there, done that, and we're right back where we started. There are roughly 4 main periods since the Civil War. There was 1868 to 1880, which is usually referred to as the Reconstruction period. And then from 1880 to 1954, almost 3/4 of a century, which is the Jim Crow period. Just a huge, huge period. And then from 65 to 2013 is the second Reconstruction period, you could actually view it as, after the Selma March, with all the changes that came. And then we have the last 11 years where we don't have the Voting Rights Act in place and where there are all kinds of changes, negative ones happening. It's interesting, in that first Reconstruction period, in his book, the Reverend Dr. William Barber describes the remarkable changes that happened during the Reconstruction period. I'm going to read from his book a couple of paragraphs. That most blacks were elected to public office during the period from 1868 to 1880 than at any other time in American history. That is, there were more blacks elected during that period than even after the civil rights period of 65. Just incredible. We don't really hear about that. During this fusion movement, he calls it a fusion movement where blacks and whites were working together in the first 10, 20 years. Blacks and whites joined together to reconstruct the nation in ways that would make it possible to move toward the noble goals of justice and equality. Some of the most progressive economic, educational, and labor laws in our nation's history were passed during that era. Almost a century before the Voting Rights Act of 65, 16 African Americans were elected to seats in the U.S. Congress, and more than 600 Blacks took the oath of office in Southern state legislatures between 1865 and 1880. Although they never held office in proportion to their numbers, African Americans wielded significant power in every state house. In North Carolina, more African Americans served in the state legislature than are there today. Through Southern white terrorism and Northern white indifference, though they destroyed Reconstruction, the redefinition of American citizenship is unimaginable without the framework of rights won by these Black and white pioneers of fusion politics. They attacked the divisive rhetoric of white solidarity and pointed to the common interests of most Black and white Southerners. And that's a glimpse of that first Reconstruction period that we really don't hear about very much. Just really quite incredible. And then we have the second period, which is generally called the Jim Crow period. That is almost 3/4 of a century, from 1880 to 1954. 3/4 of a century was able to develop and grow as the federal government stopped supporting the ongoing Reconstruction efforts. And although the Ku Klux Klan was first born right after the Civil War, it didn't really have any meaningful power until around the 1880s, until 12, 15, 20 years later. But it did begin to have its impact in the 1880s. There were two events that I think symbolize what happened with the retreat of the federal government from regulating voting and having an influence on what was happening in the states. There are two incredible events that most of us have not heard of that happened. One was in 1898 in Wilmington, North Carolina. There was a large Black business district in Wilmington. Wilmington's right on the coast of North Carolina. Anyway, there's this very successful business district and also a adjacent white Black residential neighborhood. And a riot happened. Whites came in and they completely destroyed that, as well as the Black residential areas. And the government, the state government, and the federal government did nothing about this. Very little news about it. You don't see it in the history books, but it's an indication of how governments just backed off from this issue. And a second, even more dramatic one was in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and an area that's called the Greenwood area. There was a 35-block area there that was called, Greenwood was its name. It was a sort of a sub-area of Tulsa. And it was 35 blocks of this business community. It was so big and so successful, it was referred to as the Black Wall Street of the United States. 35 blocks. And in 2021, it was burned to the ground, just completely burned to the ground, as well as the residential area, which had about 1,500 homes in it. And again, no response from the state government or the federal government. No reparations or no acknowledgement of these two events was ever made until, I think the first one was sometime in the last 2 or 3 months. There were 2 survivors from the Tulsa one. They were 100 years old, a man and a woman, who were speaking to Congress about what happened then. There's been absolutely no reparations. And this, both of these events were sort of interesting also, back when we were working on saving farmland here, and we were emphasizing the importance of buying local, and that's what they were doing in these 2 instances. They were providing the services that Blacks needed and keeping the money there by everybody was doing their shopping there, and it was just tremendously successful in building up these communities right in the middle of a segregated society. I think these are two examples that indicate the lack of federal protection. There was never any accountability, as I said. At the same time, we had public lynchings during this period, and this is really where the power of the whites came from. There were, in the ACP documents, 4,743 lynchings between 1882 up until 1968. They were still happening as late as 1968. And this, I mean, this is a huge number, but it's what the effect of this was on the Black community. It just put the fear into people. If anything you do, this can happen, and you have no recourse to the courts or anything else. And this is part of the power of the white majority in terms of the fear that it put. Then we had the second Reconstruction period, which happened after Selma. Well, actually, probably the foundation for it was led by the Supreme Court decision 10 years earlier, 1954, of desegregation. But after the Selma March, Congress, within 2 or 3 months, Congress was able to pass the Voting Rights Act, which I think we all know the kind of impact that it had on making voting possible, and in terms of lots of people being elected and being involved. It also had an impact on jobs for Blacks, and I mean, we see today still some of these positive things, like on TV, you just have huge representation of Blacks, you have large representation of other minorities that we just didn't have before. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, but we have the fourth period of 11 years ago, where the Supreme Court decided that states no longer needed to come to the Justice Department to get permission for their voting right, for rules and regulations in terms of voting. So during that previous 48 years, all of these states had to get approval for any changes they were going to make in voting rights from the Justice Department. And it was because of that progress was able to be made. Not sure what we call this present period. Is it the MAGA period or the second Jim Crow period? But it's quite real in its effect. Anyway, Justice John Roberts, in his writings, he wrote that decision in 2013 and really said that there's no longer any discrimination. Discrimination's not a problem. So we don't need this law, and it's not fair to the states that they should have to go to the federal government to get permission for all these changes. Well, you know, it's hard how dramatic this was. After that decision, within 2 hours, Texas had changed its voting rights. They had a position with the Justice Department that had not been approved. And after the court said, you no longer have to do this, so literally 2 hours afterwards, they began to make changes. Just absolutely incredible. In North Carolina, within 45 days, they passed one of the most drastic voter suppression laws, including making it very difficult with voter ID, the kind of ID you had to have in order to vote, in order to register to vote. They sliced a week off early voting, which also was very important to Black community and low-income people to have a longer period for voting in terms of difficulty in getting off the job. They Other things that they did, they authorized vigilante poll observers, lots of them, with expanded range of how you could file ways to interfere with people voting. They eliminated flexibility in opening early sites in different parts of the county, and they reduced the polling offices, decreased the number, and especially removed a lot of the voting sites from Black neighborhoods to distant ones, so you had to travel to get there. It made it harder to vote. This was North Carolina. In addition to all of those I've related, there was another 8 that I didn't list. I mean, it's just incredible. And 5 years after that court decision, there were over 1,000 polling places that had been closed in the US. That means that we don't need all of those, and people can go to these others that are more distant. Made huge cuts in early voting, and also it's possible to, they did purging of the voter rolls. And we had an example of the purging of voter rolls in Georgia. In the last election, the Secretary of State cut 70,000 voters off the rolls a month or two before the election, and things of this sort. I mean, and he was also running for governor. He was the Secretary of State who had the power to control this, but while he was running for governor, I mean, this is the kind of thing that happened just a few years ago, and he only won the election by a fairly small number of thousands of votes. And all of these changes did not just happen in southern states. It also happened in northern and western states where the Republican Party was in power. And with this lack of federal oversight, they were able to gerrymander voting districts to the detriment of Black voters. By this time, it's interesting, during the first Reconstruction, Republicans were in power, and that was Lincoln's party, and they were the ones who brought forward all of these positive things in the Reconstruction period. But in this present period, the Republicans are not, they aren't a majority of the voters, and the only way they can win an election really is by discouraging Democrats from voting, especially Black Democrats. And so that's, it's very few elections in the past number of years the Republicans have really had a majority of the votes. And that's all part of the electoral system, which we won't get into that, but it really complicates it. And, you know, in terms of changing the polling stations, we've all seen on TV these long, on voting day in this US, these long, incredibly long lines of people waiting to vote, which is because they've cut back on the polling places, and it's really trying to discourage people from voting. I think it was also North Carolina that passed a law more recently that it was illegal to offer water or something to drink to people while they're waiting in the voting line, even though they're waiting 3, 4, 5 hours. Just quite hard for us to relate to. Another thing that just happened just recently that is related to this is the book banning. It's just really in the last 4 or 5 years that banning books has become very popular in the States. PEN America, which is a nonprofit group dedicated to protecting freedom of expression and against book banning, they've been keeping track of this. And in 2022, they reported that 874 titles had been banned. But 1 year later, in 2023, it was 1,600 books. It was just a huge, huge number. And this is aimed at books that deal with Black history, with also fiction books that show people of color, teenagers, also the gay couples and lesbian couples, things of this sort, that this has become a part of the whole issue. In the US now, so it's gone through 2 Reconstruction periods, both of which were highly successful in making changes, and 2 very repressive periods. One of them is just the last 11 years. And to understand how this is possible, I see it as kind of a latent, maybe reservoir of racism that's able to rise and fall depending on the political atmosphere. It's not that after the Voting Rights Act, everybody agreed with it, but it was set as a standard. There was the rule of law, and people respected the law, and even those who didn't agree with it respected the law. But I think during the Trump era, it became possible to, for this latent, it became publicly acceptable to talk about these things. So that's part of it. But also, I think a bigger issue is when you look at this history, the South has never come to terms with the Civil War. That you really wouldn't know that the South lost the war in terms of all the events that have happened. For instance, in the South, Confederate generals were honored by building large statues honoring them in the middle of town squares. There are nearly 300 of these monuments and statues that were built in Georgia and Virginia and North Carolina, just to name 3 states. Also, something that was happening in the States up until 1950 was the last one. They had a habit of, in the 1900s, of naming military bases for Confederate generals. I mean, can you believe this? That these Confederate generals who were insurrectionists really had fought against the country, you're now celebrating them and naming your national military bases. There were, Fort Benning, Fort Bragg, Fort Gordon, Fort Hood, Fort Lee, these were all Confederate generals. Well, if you compare this as a resolution, what happened after the victory and the loss of in the Civil War, compare that to Germany. Can you imagine in Germany that they would have had statues of Hitler and Göring and their generals? I mean, it's just unthinkable. But the contrast between these 2 resolutions and resolutions after the conflict is just amazing. And I think it's part of the problem that we really have not resolved that. We haven't really addressed it. I mean, just in the news this last week with Nikki Haley, I mean, she's been saying incredible things. She said that the US is not a racist country, and she was interviewed about 10 days ago, and a reporter asked her, what was the cause of the Civil War? Well, she went on about freedom and states' rights. She never once mentioned slavery. And she grew up in North Carolina. So even though she's Indian, her background is Southern in terms of her life experience. So that's my life experience too. But anyway, the point is that she's not that exceptional, that statement. I know there have been a number of programs looking at Confederate Southern historians and Southern community groups where this question is asked, and they will insist very vehemently that slavery was not the issue of the Civil War. It's just really hard to relate to. So, it's been almost 50 years since the Selma March. Well, it's actually been 60 years, but in the almost 50 years when the Voting Rights Act was in place, we see and saw that there was incredible progress. However, in these last 11 years, the foundation of this progress has been greatly weakened in terms of voting rights. I think that a lot's going to depend on this next November election in the states, in which way the U.S. goes in terms of both civil rights and really preserving some of the basic democratic foundations that have characterized the U.S. in the past. But Selma has shown that it is possible to achieve major social change through large, organized, nonviolent actions by holding on to the plow, as the song said. But Selma, even after 50 years of incredible progress in civil rights, tells us that there are no guarantees, that change is not guaranteed, that progress that you make is not guaranteed unless it is continually protected and reinforced. And we forget our history, and we forget the rights and privileges we have at our peril. So on that happy note, I think I will stop here.
At the March on Washington, and when there's thousands and thousands of people, and one of the stark contrast between a Martin Luther King and a Donald Trump was seen when he was addressing those people. The first half of the speech that we all know is the later part of the I Have a Dream. The first part is making sure that people calm down. I mean, he had a ride in the making if he had wanted to. He could have just triggered it like that. And he's talking about the importance of nonviolence, of working together, of seeing people as people. And then, of course, the last election, we saw somebody quite different doing something. And but I mean, and that difference, I think, as you said, Carl, a lot can be done, but you can lose a lot very, very quickly if you're not aware. And I mean, in our province right now, there's a certain political party that wants all equity, diversity, and inclusion offices on university campuses closed. And they've made that part of their policy. They haven't brought it into the government yet, but they have that on their party policies. So I mean that these things are not that far away. So this, you obviously know this song. Originally, it was a Black spiritual, We Will Overcome. And Pete learned it in a summer camp that probably Paula attended. And he's the one who brought it, and he changed it to We Shall, from We Will to We Shall. And he introduced it to Martin Luther King Jr., and then of course it became the civil rights anthem, but it has spread around the world. So solidarity in Poland, in South Africa, and so on. So stand up if you're willing and able. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, short verse that they wrote in Montgomery, Alabama. We are not afraid, not afraid. We are not afraid. We are not afraid today. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. We shall all be free. We shall all be free. We shall all be free. We shall all be free someday. The whole wide world around. Whole wide world around. The whole wide world around. The whole wide world around. Someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. This is another poem by Langston Hughes, and I think it captures the urgency that Carl was talking about. It's called Harlem. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun? Or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat? Or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load. Or does it explode? The last song, written by Fred Hellerman of the Weavers. And I think he wrote it around 1960. It was about civil rights during the period of '64. And he taught it to Pete Seeger. And Pete was in a Southern church, Southern Baptist church, and probably around this size, 150 people, a few more people than we have. And then it was announced the 3 civil rights workers' bodies were found in the river. And Pete sang this song, and he said what struck him, he expected so much anger And he said he didn't see that. He just saw resolve. And so he sang this song with them, and afterwards everybody wanted the lyrics for it. Do you know it? Who knows it? Okay, well, except for the bridge, it's really easy. You just have to do what I do after I do it. So just sing exactly the same thing. Oh, healing river, healing river, send down your waters, send down your waters on this land. Oh, healing river, send down your water to wash the blood from off the sand. You got it. This land is thirsting, this land is parching, no seed is growing in the barren ground. The land is thirsting, this land is parching. Oh, healing river, send your waters down. Oh, healing river, send down your waters, send down your waters upon this land. Oh, healing river, send down your water to wash the blood from off the sand. Now this is the bridge, so don't sing this part. Let the seed of freedom awake and flourish. Let the deep roots nourish. Let the tall stalk rise. O seed of freedom, awake and flourish. Proud leaves uncurling unto the skies. O healing river, send down your water, send down your waters upon this land. O healing river, send down your water to wash the blood from off the sand. O healing river, send down your water. O healing river, send down the land. O healing river, send down your water to wash the blood from off the sand. Thank you for joining us.